Huckabee doesn't even believe that there is a such thing as a Palestinian. With that in mind, let's listen to Mike Huckabee reason out why the UN aid system was so bad and so corrupt, and why the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is so perfect, and it's been so useful even though 210 people have starved and 75% of that has been in the last month and a half, with the proximate event to that being withholding aid from Gaza as a population as a negotiating chip with Hamas for complete surrender, which will never happen.
When their own numbers indicate that 88% of what they take in gets stolen, I wouldn't be critical of the GHF. In fact,
all right, so the UN said most of that 88% figure is actually true. It is true, and most of that happens in Israeli-controlled zones, sometimes called red zones. And the idea that this is Hamas is absurd. Hamas would be killed if they did this. And if it was Hamas and they were intercepting 88% of all these convoys, then we'd have footage of that for days. And we would have so much evidence that this was a coordinated Hamas effort that no one would be questioning it. But the fact is, the UN, Cindy McCain, World Food Program, right? They've all said there's no evidence for this. The EU said there's no evidence for this. Or USAID said there's no evidence for this. Right? These are just civilians. These are civilians who see the aid convoy and they surround it. Because guess what? Like hundreds of them have already starved, which means tens of thousands of them are actively in pain from starvation. Like excruciating pain. So they're not just going to wait for the aid convoy to go to where it's been assigned to go. They're going to intercept it where it is, because that might be their only chance to get food.
In fact, I think people ought to be grateful that they are getting the food to the people. And I'll say again, when I was at those feeding sites and when I talked to Gazans, I did not hear anything other than, we love America, we're glad you've done this, and this is the first time we're getting food that we didn't have to pay for. Why does Hamas hate GHF?
Can we get that conversation on like some kind of video or something? I'd love to hear. Earlier in this interview, he's also said that Gazans don't hate the IDF. Like, please, anytime a Gazan has ever talked, like on a video, they're either criticizing the IDF or Hamas, right? The Gazans at this point, they're so disillusioned. They think, well, they rightfully believe that both Israel and Hamas wants them dead. So don't tell me that they love America when all these bombs are American bombs, right? They do not love Israel. They do not love America. They see America and Israel as the same thing. And a good chunk of them still support October 7th. Like, I believe it went down to 37% from about 60%. Supported it in the beginning, but in the beginning they didn't really watch the videos. They didn't get confirmation on the war crimes that did happen. But the Gazans, a good chunk of them, still defend that October 7th. And in the West Bank, that is much higher. Of course. It's above 50%, I believe, but it's still fallen significantly. Well, let's keep going.
One of the things they demanded in one of the negotiations just 2.5 weeks ago was that GHF had to be shut down. Why would Hamas want to shut it down? I'll tell you why. Because GHF method of getting food has really hurt their capacity to control the food market, and it's costing them money. Otherwise, they would say, sure, go ahead and bring the food, and all we care about is people getting to eat. But they don't care about people getting to eat. They care that they eat. And if you look at the people from Hamas...
Well, if you go to Swords of Iron Aid, Kogat, which anyone can look up, you could see that a lot more aid was coming in 2024. The early months of 2024 were actually pretty good for aid. Early months of 2025 were pretty good too, because that was during a ceasefire, until that was, of course, all cut off overnight, and the 2.5-month blockade set in, being the proximate event to the hunger that we're seeing right now. But no, it seems that all these organizations working at hundreds of different points throughout Gaza, and not these like 4 different kind of arbitrary areas that Palestinians are traversing over war zones to get to. It doesn't seem like that's a good system. Now, why does Hamas specifically object to it? Probably because it's American and Israel doing something in in a Palestinian area. Like, it's just, I don't see how any Palestinian would like that. It's just very colonial-y from America and Israel to do that. Even if it was completely successful, they would much rather have an independent, neutral force doing it. And it seems that, you know, a ton of people died in these areas, like, suspiciously, much more so than the UN system. So there's tons of reason to oppose it. I don't know why Hamas specifically opposes it. Hamas is a weird organization. I don't know exactly what their motivation is at any given time, but who knows?
When they get photographed, they're well fed. None of them are hungry. I guarantee you, look at their faces, look at their bodies. And instead of food, they could use some of those.
Yeah, because they have a job. Everyone in Gaza lost their jobs, right? They used to go into Israel to work, and then Hamas would tax them, but they'd have an income. They used to also have agriculture, but 99% of that is destroyed, right? Hamas is the only people with jobs. And they're probably soon to be unemployed once the Gaza city gets occupied. To the extent that there's any Hamas left, it's in there. I wonder what's happening to Hamas recruitment, though. That is an interesting topic. Like, do people actually want to join Hamas, or do they want to join a more moderate group? My understanding is that the Palestinian people generally support Hamas on secular grounds, political grounds, not on religious grounds, the likes of which are seen in their 1988 charter to some extent in these kind of quotes talking about, like, the end times and the Muslims fighting the Jews. But the Palestinians definitely sympathize with some of Hamas's message, especially the more secular one, talking about the occupation. But I don't know where that political ambition is outing itself into. I don't know how that's getting expressed right now. Because I don't see how Hamas is that big in Gaza at this point. They just can't, like, they're not getting any new weapons, pretty much. Like, baby formula is not getting into Gaza when doctors try and take it in their own briefcases. So you bet that ammunition and weapons aren't getting into Gaza. But actually, maybe over Rafah there might be a little bit of a smuggling flow. But who knows? That's probably also shut down.
Olympic. But yeah, there's some real deprivation in that country, but it's not because GHF is killing people. What the people told me, it was Hamas that was shooting the folks coming to get the food, not only at the GHF sites, if they could get to them, but also...
Actually, if you're interested in this, look at the Guardian's analysis. Because, like, there's so much... It's almost impossible to accurately cover a wartime scenario. Like, it's almost better to just not cover it the day stuff comes out, and assume what happens. And a lot of that is happening with this conflict. And I've certainly fallen for things that turned out to be false, doubted things that turned out to be true, etc. But to add more credibility to the Israeli fire at the GHF. Now, I can't prove that there's any kind of coordinated killing campaign there, or that there's someone gave an execution order, right? It's probably just laziness, right? These soldiers who have to deal with the crowd they don't like, probably deeply racist, bigoted individuals, right? Remember, 70% of young Israeli Jews identify with the Likud party, which is overtly against Palestinian rights, but whatever. So you can see how a lot of these people could care less about Palestinian lives. So when they're told to guard this kind of food fortress, with people stampeding over each other to get their one meal per day at 600 calories, right? That's why there's starvation, by the way, because the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has only provided one meal per day on average, which is 600 calories for a dinner meal, according to the World Food Program. But that's besides the point. You can see how they could just be careless, right? And that's my kind of hypothesis for this whole conflict, is just a general carelessness by the IDF, and an ideological problem within the IDF. Less so than top-down orders to execute Palestinian civilians. I think this is the problem. Now there have been bad top-down orders, like talk about policy, talk about the 3-month blockade, talk about in the beginning they took a mile in from the whole Gaza border and razed everything, including 35% of Gaza agriculture, like strawberry farms, etc., and every house. Right, this is 15% of all of Gaza. Just stroke of a pen, it's all flattened. Doesn't matter if there's Hamas there, it's just flattened. I think that's clearly a proportionality issue there. But nevertheless, Guardian report is very helpful. It identified ammunition, clearly Israeli ammunition at the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation sites. I can't imagine that Hamas is doing all this stuff. I'm more actually leaning towards the side that Hamas is weaker and smaller than we think, rather than it is bigger than we think. Because that was kind of the narrative that Blinken was pushing a while ago, that Hamas was bigger than we think, that they're hiring a bunch of people, but I don't see it. Unless they're all in Gaza City, I just don't see it.
At the UN sites. That's just a reality. I think you're going to hear it from the GHF representative when he talks to you.
I appreciate the tenor of our conversation. I think it's an important conversation. I do think that you and I agree about many things in this war, and we disagree about some of them, but I do think this kind of conversation is really important, and I appreciate you joining me. Thank you very much.
All right. That's it for that interview. I haven't listened to this. I only listened to the Mehdi Hassan portion. But one thing I did look at is this Anthony Aguilar thing, and I do think that there's significant evidence that he is untrustworthy, because I think he lied about his termination, saying that he quit when he was really fired, right? I don't know. I have to look into that, but what he says about the GHF, it directly contradicts everything that the GHF spokespeople say about the GHF. So, well, who knows? This is the pain of not having any journalists there. So we don't really know what's happening.